There's a stereotype of older ladies peering through curtains and being nosy about the habits of neighbors. But what if that curiosity leads to the discovery of major crimes and a raid by federal agents? Marjorie Gray had never liked surprises, which is why she began every morning the same way: 2 slices of toast, a pot of Earl Grey, and the crossword while listening to the local news on the radio. At 72, she found comfort in her routine, especially since her husband Douglas had passed away 3 years prior, leaving her with a silent house, an overgrown garden, and unexpected paperwork and bills. Her best friend, Kathy Briggs, who lived 4 doors down, was the opposite. Kathy loved chaos and the unexpected. She volunteered at the community theater, kept 3 cats, drove a scarlet Mini Cooper, and had a way of turning ordinary errands into adventures. Their friendship worked because Marjorie was all order and Kathy all spontaneity, a balance that had kept them companions for nearly 40 years. It was a crisp Tuesday in late October when Kathy arrived at Marjorie's door, cheeks flushed and eyes shining. "You'll never believe what I've seen," she declared, barging in without waiting to be invited. Marjorie smiled wryly. "You say that every week. This time it's truly something. You know that new man who bought the baker's place?" "Sure, the guy with that big rusted van." "Yeah, that one. He's up to something." Marjorie raised her eyebrows. "Kathy, you thought the postman was up to something last month." "And I was right, wasn't I? He was stealing Mrs. Larkin's subscription boxes." "No, it was a misunderstanding. Her daughter had them redirected." Kathy waved this away. "Be that as it may, this one's different. I saw him unloading crates from his van at midnight last night." "Crates of what?" "That's just it. I mean, I couldn't tell, but they were heavy, metal-looking. He was struggling with the weight, and he was being secretive, looking around him the whole time to make sure no one was out and about. Of course, he never spotted me. I know how not to be seen." Marjorie poured herself another cup of tea. "You are experienced at spying," she laughed. "I prefer observing. It's a civic duty." Marjorie wanted to dismiss it, but Kathy's tone, half creeped out, half thrilled, tickled at something inside her. Since Douglas's death, life had often felt small, predictable, except for the craziness that Kathy could bring. So, foolish or not, Marjorie usually went along. By Friday, Marjorie found herself in Kathy's living room, peering through a pair of binoculars that Kathy insisted she'd bought for bird watching. The blinds were drawn to a narrow slit, the lights were off, and a thermos of tea sat between them like contraband. "There," Kathy whispered, pointing toward the Baker house. "He's back." The man, Thomas Duncan, they had found out with a surreptitious glance inside his mailbox on a walk 2 days before, was tall, square-shouldered, and perpetually wearing dark jackets, no matter the weather. Marjorie had seen him at the supermarket once, buying nothing but canned soup and batteries. They watched as he reversed his gray van into the driveway. The back doors opened, and he started to take out crates. Small, metal, stamped with symbols Marjorie couldn't quite make out. He set them in short stacks inside his garage. "Looks industrial," Marjorie murmured. Kathy squinted. "Or military." "Don't be absurd." Duncan glanced around every time he went to the van, and carried only 1 crate at a time. Marjorie had to admit it could be suspicious. Could be. "You see," Kathy said quietly but triumphantly. "I told you something's off." Marjorie frowned. "Well, it's hardly proof of anything." "Then we just have to find out what's in those boxes." Marjorie turned. "We'll do what?" "Investigate. You and me were on the case." The next evening, as they staked out Mr. Duncan from Kathy's dark living room, they saw him leave in his van. And they were prepared for this. Kathy had insisted they be dressed all in black in case he left home and they got to do some up-close sleuthing. And so, moments later, they were creeping down the sidewalk, Kathy sporting a sequined beret that rather defeated the purpose of their outfits. Don't you think we draw more attention to ourselves dressed as ninjas than we would have in regular clothing? Marjorie asked. This is how one gathers intel at night, Kathy insisted. They slipped through the hedge at the edge of Duncan's property. The garage was padlocked, but there was a small side window, which was their target. Kathy cupped her hands around her eyes and peeked through the glass, while Marjorie stood by anxiously. Can you see anything? Kathy shifted. There's wooden boxes, metal cases. There's a tarp, and underneath, she gasped. Oh, God! What? Kathy turned, eyes wide. Guns, Margie, dozens of them, rifles, maybe even automatic ones. Margie looked skeptical. There's no way you would know if they're automatic. You're no firearms expert. Look for yourself, Kathy gestured. They're guns, stacked like firewood. He's got an arsenal in there. Marjorie peered through the window and caught the glint of metal underneath the covering tarp. Kathy wasn't exaggerating. They stumbled back to the safety of the hedge, hearts pounding. Marjorie's practical mind raced. If it were true, what should be their next step? Perhaps we should call the police, she said finally. And say what? Hello, we're two old ladies who peeked into a neighbor's window and we think he's a warlord. They'd laugh us off. Marjorie sighed. Then what do you suggest? Kathy grinned. We get proof. Over the next week they watched Duncan's house closely. He received visitors late at night, men in dark coats who stayed briefly, leaving with small square cases. Marjorie and Kathy had taken to napping in turns on the couch, watching the house into the wee hours. On Thursday of that week, at about 1:30 in the morning, they saw him taking a shovel around the side of his house. By scurrying upstairs to the farthest window of Kathy's house, they could see into his backyard. To Marjorie's surprise and Kathy's delight, he was burying a small box. Marjorie kept notes tucked into her crossword book, labeling each page at the top with the word evidence. Kathy, ever bolder, began snapping photographs through her curtains. A few days after this, to her horror, Duncan came to Marjorie's door. She froze at the knock, debating whether to answer or not, but she was curious, and Kathy would never forgive her if she didn't answer. She opened the door just a little. Mr. Duncan, what a surprise! Too late, she remembered that she wasn't supposed to know his name. They'd never introduced themselves. She only knew his name because she'd opened his mailbox. She flushed, and her heart began pounding even harder. He gave a polite but strained smile. Morning. Sorry to trouble you, but have you or your friend been watching my house? Marjorie suppressed panic. I beg your pardon? He glanced down the street towards Kathy's and then back at her. I thought I saw movement. My work is rather private. You understand. And his tone was ever so slightly menacing. Of course, she stammered. We wouldn't dream of prying. He studied her for a moment, then nodded as if saying good day and walked away. Marjorie shut the door and leaned against it, feeling faint. Within minutes, Kathy was in her kitchen. He knows, Marjorie wailed. Let him suspect, Kathy said airily, though her hands trembled. This all just means that we're right. To Marjorie, it was a clear warning that they should back off, but to Kathy, it was proof they should continue. And so, within a couple of nights, Kathy was hatching a daring plan. If we can get one of those boxes, we'll know for sure. Marjorie could hardly believe what she had agreed to as they crept back through the hedge once more the next night. Kathy had argued that maybe the garage window wasn't locked, and it was true. They had never checked to see if they could open it. Marjorie argued that there was no way that Duncan would be so lax as to leave a window unlocked, and she turned out to be right. But at that moment, Kathy pulled a bobby pin and a paperclip from her pocket and approached the padlock on the garage door. You can't possibly be serious, Marjorie half hissed, scanning for cameras but seeing none. I've been watching YouTube videos, Kathy said, clearly enjoying herself. Just when Marjorie's anxiety was getting to be intolerable and she was about to insist they leave, click, the lock opened. "Aha! Never underestimate YouTube," Kathy said triumphantly. Inside, the air smelled of oil and wood. Moonlight glinted off the metal bands around the wooden crates, against the metal cases and the ends of rifles. They both used their phone flashlights to look around. The wooden boxes were stenciled with black letter codes and abbreviations that were mostly indecipherable, except for occasional words. Short range, tracer, ball, and MM for millimeters. "I think this is mostly ammunition," Marjorie whispered. "See," Kathy murmured, "weapons." She was busy opening a small metal case, undoing the various latches with her free hand. Inside was a sleek black metal device wrapped in foam padding. It was cylindrical with wires and a barcode. It wasn't a recognizable weapon. It looked mechanical, like part of a machine. "What do you think that is?" Marjorie whispered. "Not a clue," Kathy replied, snapping pictures with her phone as Marjorie aimed her phone flashlight at various things. "Oh, wow," Marjorie said in a hush, her light illuminating the words, "for demolition." Kathy got the photo, and just then, headlights swept across the driveway, barely visible where the door of the garage met the ground. Yes, they'd closed the door, but the open padlock was still hanging from Kathy's belt loop. They shared a split second of horrified, wide-eyed stares at one another before ducking behind the nearest crates, Marjorie frantically shaking her phone to switch off the flashlight. They could hear Duncan speaking, another man answering, 2 car doors shutting. The voices faded slightly, and then they could hear the slam of the front door. The voices now came from inside the house, and heavy footsteps were audible. Duncan was talking, but it was muffled. Just as he and the other man passed by the door to the garage, they caught, "Be in Tijuana by then." They eyed each other in the dim light. They had both heard Tijuana clearly, but everything before and after that was hard to make out. Kathy stood, turned her flashlight on, and pulled Marjorie up by one arm, dragging her to the garage door, weaving around the cases. She raised the door slowly to keep it quiet, both of them ducking under as soon as humanly possible, Kathy carefully guiding the door back down, managing to get it onto the cement without a sound. She padlocked the door, and they jogged away, not in the direction of Kathy's house, which would have meant going past Duncan's front windows, but the other way. They ended up walking a few blocks, taking a route that let them avoid their street, and coming up behind Marjorie's through the alleyway, coming into her house through the back door. "That," Marjorie finally said, sitting at her kitchen table with a small tumbler of whiskey in front of her, "was insane." Kathy tapped her own whiskey glass softly against her friend's and grinned. She pointed to her phone, sitting on the table, and said, "What that was worth it." By 10 a.m. the next morning, Marjorie had taken charge of what to do next. She'd found the number for the ATF field office in Richmond, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. They made the call sitting at Marjorie's kitchen table on speakerphone, and when a weary-sounding agent answered, Marjorie's voice was steady. "I live in Ashmont. I believe you're my closest field office. My neighbor and I have discovered that a man on our street has boxes of military-grade ammunition and possibly military weapons in his garage, which we have photographs of. We heard him say something would be in Tijuana soon. It seems like something your office may want to look into." The agent sounded bored with their bombshell information. "Ma'am, have you contacted your local police?" "No," Marjorie admitted. "It was my understanding that your offices would be involved in a case like this." "Yeah, if it turns out somebody was obtaining military arms, we would be called in on a case like that, but it's up to your local police to determine whether that has occurred." In the background, Kathy gave an exaggerated eye roll, but Marjorie remained polite. Okay, then we'll contact local police instead. Have a good day, she said and hung up. He didn't think an older woman would know her ass from her elbow, Kathy complained. It's not like we didn't verify our information. We Googled every acronym we could read in those photos. It's nearly all military. Marjorie nodded. It's okay, I have a plan. We get dressed up, business casual, professional looking, our best shoes. We go somewhere to print our photos, and we show up at the police station with a pile of 8x10 glossies. They're not going to poo-poo that. They entered the police station that afternoon with Kathy under strict orders to follow Marjorie's lead. Early in the conversation with Officer Evans, who appeared to be roughly 16 years old, Marjorie explained that the garage door had been unlocked and that they had smelled gasoline and opened the door due to concerns about fire. This earned her a sly eyebrow from Kathy, who was impressed. And you then proceeded to take photos because... Officer Evans inquired, trailing off. Marjorie put forth a specific photo. Well, in addition to the enormous inventory of all these weapons, there was this crate, marked for demolition. That didn't sound civilian to me. No, he agreed. 10 minutes later, they repeated the entire story to a much more senior officer who took them seriously. This would be something we'd bring in the ATF on, he said to Officer Evans. Yes, Marjorie said smoothly. We tried contacting them directly. The older man, Officer Barnes, he'd introduced himself as, gave her a smile. And they directed you to us? Marjorie shrugged it off. They figured we didn't know what we were talking about, but we've looked up every acronym in these photos. We believe most of this is military. Well, I have a feeling the ATF will take a call from me a little more seriously, but I'll be sure to credit you. And you may need to come back to the station to provide further information. He reviewed the notes that Evans had scrawled down in the initial conversation. Barnes frowned a little, then looked amused. So, you said you found the garage unlocked and opened the door to a strong gasoline smell and concerns about fire. He looked up at Marjorie with a wry smile and a glint of humor in his eye. Yes, sir, that's right, Marjorie nodded. Mr. Duncan smoked cigarettes, I felt it was a civic duty. Kathy pressed her lips together to stifle her laugh. For the next 4 days, the street became fascinating to watch all by itself. They noticed a delivery van parked on the corner for 2 solid hours before being replaced by a moving van parked on a different corner most of the day. A few times they saw strangers walking dogs who they'd never seen before, and Kathy, of course, knew everyone. One stranger was just a new neighbor, but several strangers in under a week was suspicious. Both women were quite entertained, playing Spot the Fed. Officer Barnes gave Marjorie a call on the 4th evening and spoke to both women by speakerphone, explaining to them the actions that were being taken. Apparently Duncan was a person of interest to the ATF, although he hadn't been thought to be very high priority until the evidence they'd provided came through. In the last few days, surveillance had let them know that Duncan was moving a shipment on Monday night, and they were planning a controlled raid. Kathy could barely contain herself. A sting operation, she said. Mrs. Briggs, Barnes said with a slight chuckle, I'm going to formally request that you stay inside. Both of you. No binoculars between the curtains, no photos. Stay away from your windows, just watch TV that night. Understood? Kathy grinned. Scout's honor. Monday night fell. At 11:15, the sound of a diesel engine drifted up the street. Through her curtains, Marjorie saw Duncan's van back into the driveway, while another vehicle, dark, no license plates, parked at the curb. Kathy, she whispered, it's happening. They crouched by the window, despite their promise. Duncan and 2 men began hauling crates from the garage to the van, and then, out of the shadows, headlights blazed. SUVs converged from both ends of the street. People in dark uniforms spilled out. Shouting erupted. Federal agents! Drop your weapons! The night had simply exploded in shouts, flashing lights, spotlights. Duncan froze, then bolted toward the side yard, straight into a line of ATF agents. The second man reached for his hip, drawing a gun, and was tackled to the ground before he could fire. Kathy gripped Marjorie's arm. "We did it, Margie! We really did it!" Marjorie could only nod, her heart hammering. She'd never seen anything so terrifying or strangely exhilarating in her life. The next morning, the quiet suburban street was swarming with news vans and lots of curious neighbors there to ogle the police tape. Officer Barnes stopped by Marjorie's house to thank the ladies personally. "What I'm told," he explained after sipping a cup of coffee Marjorie had made for him, "is that the weapons were traced to a military storage facility in Georgia. Looks like your neighbor was part of a pipeline moving stolen U.S. military stock to Mexico and Central America." Kathy beamed. "We always suspected he wasn't just tinkering in that garage." Marjorie raised an eyebrow. "Well, you always suspected, but you turned out to be right." Barnes smiled. "You ladies have good instincts." And then, lowering his voice conspiratorially, "But please, no more late-night stakeouts and no more trespassing, all right?" Marjorie looked innocent. "Oh, we'll stick to book club. Probably. Maybe I'll take up knitting." A couple of weeks later, as Marjorie and Kathy walked in the local park, Kathy asked if she wanted to go to the local artsy theater and catch the indie movie playing there that coming Friday. No new criminal activity had erupted in the neighborhood, and Kathy was getting antsy. "I'm afraid I can't on Friday," Marjorie answered. "Maybe Saturday?" Kathy stopped dead in her tracks and looked at her friend in surprise. "You've plans for Friday? Do tell." Marjorie smiled. "I have a date, a second date, as a matter of fact, to have dinner with James Barnes." "Officer Barnes?" Kathy clarified. "Yeah." Kathy looked positively thrilled. "Well," she said, resuming their walk and taking her old friend's arm, "this time it seems you started your own adventure." Marjorie was still smiling. "I suppose I have." If you enjoyed this reading and want to hear more, please subscribe so you don't miss future uploads. Please hit the like button and check out our playlist of funny stories, stories about unhinged people, or tales of nightmare neighbors. You'll find those lists and many more at our channel. This has been Tales by Rachel, where we breathe life into every story.